This is one of those topics that no one really wants to think about, but if you're a parent, a homeowner, married, or helping take care of aging parents, it's something that honestly deserves a little attention. I'm talking about estate planning. And before you tune out thinking it's complicated or expensive, that's actually why I want to mention Trust and Will. Trust and Will makes estate planning feel way less intimidating than it sounds. They offer modern, attorney-designed wills and trusts that you can create online. And the process is surprisingly straightforward. In fact, you can create a will in as little as 30 minutes. That includes things like guardianship for your kids or pets, how your assets are distributed, and even healthcare directives. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect your loved ones with Trust and Will, the most trusted name in online estate planning. Go to trustandwill.com/future to get 20% off. That's trustandwill.com/future for 20% off. trustandwill.com/future.
Welcome to the Irish NFL Show in association with QuinnBet and proudly hosted on the Believe Network. We're making use of the weeks between now and the 2026 draft to break down each division and each team's needs. With just 3 weeks to go, we're looking now to the NFC South. Shane, Ciaran and Craig with me. Shane Brennan, Craig Rigden, and that's a great start. Forgetting people's names. It's been too long. What's it been? All of 6 days since we last spoke to one another. And Ciaran Boyle with me, Conor Brophy. The bestest friends that ever there were. And you can't even remember their surname. So too much chocolate over Easter, clearly. We start with the Carolina Panthers. We're going to go through the division in the order in which the teams finished last year, which obviously is the reverse of their draft order. The Panthers have the number 19 selection in the first round. They have 7 picks altogether. Looking at NFL mock draft database, their consensus first round pick for the Panthers is Kenyon Sadiq. So NFL mock draft database looks at 72 different mock drafts and chooses a player for each team based on what the preponderance of those 72 drafts suggest. So they're not particularly weighted, but it's an interesting exercise in that it tells you what most of the drafts, or at least 20 to 30 to 40% in some cases, are saying. They have Kenyon Sadiq going to the Panthers. Shane Brennan, what do you think the Panthers need to be doing in this draft?
Thank you very much, Conor Brophy. I'm delighted to be here. I was joking before we came on the air, by the way, that I've had so much orange chocolate this year. My name might as well be Terry. So in which case, the name mix-up is understandable. Interesting look at the Panthers here. I mean, we're coming into a situation where they were quite aggressive in free agency in terms of bringing in Jalen Phillips, David Lloyd, and Rasheed Walker as offensive tackles. So there's a lot of different ways they can come at this. As much as the consensus pick sort of has them going for tight end, I think there's a lot of different ways to go here. I definitely see them moving towards sort of showing up that offensive line again. We saw with Bryce Young in many areas of the season last year how he needs two things. You need a really strong running game to complement him. And look, they've let Rico Dowdle go out of the building, so it'll be interesting to see what way they will try to supplement the run game now with that, considering how explosive Dowdle was in many of those key games that brought the Panthers into a position where they could win the NFC South last year. But I think fundamentally, the run game and the pass game starts in the offensive line. It seems boring, and we talk about this a lot with a lot of teams that, line play is what they need to focus on first. But let's be fair about this. Bryce Young needs time to think when he's throwing the ball. He's not the greatest improviser in the world. So what are you going to give him? We saw at many different points last year, if he's given that extra second, that he can go outside the numbers, and when he decides to go a pass out wide, he can be very accurate. How do you maximize that? You try to shore up on the offensive line, and for that reason, I think Monroe Freeling, for example, offensive tackle of Georgia, if he's still available around 19th, might be an interesting pick. But what you need is somebody who will give you that immediate impact. You outlined earlier the fact that they have a fairly plain draft. They have a first, second, third, fourth, 2 fifths, and a sixth. So coaching is going to be key. They don't have a huge amount of draft capital to trade. I don't think they're going to make any major trades. I think the second round might be where they dip in for a running back to try and sort of build up the skill positions there. But I think first and foremost, if you're your defense, you've proven is a pretty solid unit. You don't need to spend first round capital on that, as much as I see a lot of people having them taking safety or something in that second round of the defense. I think first and foremost, go for offensive line. That's what I would do if I was the Carolina Panthers.
Craig, I have the most unscientific method for picking which teams are going to thrive in this year's NFL. And bear with me now, because I was looking at the owners meeting in Phoenix, and in the head coach's picture and around the breakfast, I was looking at which coaches look like they've had the most restful off season and who's looking the best. Dave Canales looks fantastic. He looks fit. He looked rested. There's no bags under his eyes. Like other coaches, they look best. Like I would not have wanted to be standing or sitting beside Dave Canales in the head coach photo, because whoever was next to him was going to look like, you know, what, $10 of shit in a £5 bag to use that colourful expression. And I can't remember who it was, but yeah, I felt really sorry for him in the photo. Dan Campbell looked really relaxed. Dan Campbell's grown the hair out. He looked like he's had a pretty chill time. So even though the bookies have the Panthers as last in the NFC South, despite having won it last year, which tells you a lot, I suppose, about the confidence that they do or don't have in Bryce Young, and also the changes that other teams have made around them, to be fair. I'm picking the Panthers to win this division on that unscientific method. You probably have a much more scientific and data-driven way of assessing this, because you're a man who does the research and doesn't just go on gut feel. Tell my Grand National bets always work out really well as well. Oh, that horse has a pretty name.
I'm quite surprised that Dave Canales is quite well rested, because I do actually think they have a really, really big problem in the terms of how they go in this first round of the draft, because Ike Ekwonu went down in the playoffs, and he has, by all accounts, a pretty significant knee injury that they still don't know what the timeline is for his return. So I think Shane's kind of nailed it a little bit in the fact that offensive tackle might have to be the way that they go, and maybe look at someone who's more of a stopgap who can then push into guard. I kept having a look at a few different mock drafts and doing some mock drafts of my own to try and see who was falling down to that range, because obviously they're picking 19. So it's likely that they miss on Fanu, they miss on Lumu, they miss on Marigoa. I think Bama's 6'7" behemoth that is Caden Proctor, he is the man if they're going to do it, because I think a lot of people see him more of being just a ridiculously sized guard who can just push in. But if Ekwonu's not back in time, then he could quite easily potentially go out, start at left tackle for them, work out there until he comes back, and then move inside. I know it's not ideal to do that with a rookie, but I think if anyone can do it, it's someone of that size who could probably just anchor it for a bit. It's funny because Shane then turned around and said, I'm not going to look at safety. And I think if Ekwonu is healthy and they are confident, safety is where they should go. They have Trevor Morig, who have signed a 3-year deal. They don't have a free safety to complement him very well. They have Nick
I can't remember a draft of recent vintage where so many teams actually seems to be looking for a safety.
Yeah.
And high up.
Yeah. And I they're not going to get Caleb Downs. There's no way he falls to 19. But someone like is it Dylan Thieneman? I think if he was to fall, I think they would snap him up. You know, he played a lot of box safety, so he can do free safety if necessary. Could be a difference maker. Would play very well for Oregon. So I think one of those two is pretty obvious. They probably still need wide receiver help. I think McMillan is great, but Coker's not consistent enough, and Xavier Legette is even less consistent. So they could go there, but I think you probably look at third or fourth. They'll probably have a flyer on one of them.
Ciaran, the Panthers got to the playoffs last year, and don't mean to disrespect them, but it was more about what other teams didn't do at times than it was what the Panthers did do. They, in fairness to them, kept their heads while literally all about them in the division were losing theirs, waited for the Bucs to step on a couple of rakes. So they are not going to be taken for granted where they are in the division, and they do have work to do.
Oh, they have a huge amount of work to do, and I agree with Shane in what they need on the line. I definitely agree with Craig on what they need at safety too. But I mean, this is just the definition of an average team. I mean, the whole division was pretty average last year, and you remember the Panthers went through that stretch of win-loss from October 19th onwards. So they did. It's not exactly like they set the division on fire. Don't forget they had a losing season, 8-9, and I think that's the 8th straight losing season they've had in Carolina. So it's not exactly a solid kind of foundation for success. Now, saying that, the owners
having dumped over them, they went down swinging in the playoffs, and they
did
a really good cut at the Rams.
They did, and it did, but it didn't look great the first half. It had blowout written all over it, if we remember that particular game. But interesting to talk about the head coaches meetings last week. Canales was quoted as saying, "I don't believe in drafting for depth." So he's in the position right now where he's got to win because he's going into year 3. He's got another year with Bryce Young. And you remember what they did last year. Who did they pick? Old Ted McMillan, and that turned out to be a masterstroke. So they're going to be looking at offense, in my opinion. You look at the stats, you look across the board. Defense, pretty good. I'm not going to say, they're kind of middle of the road. But with offense, total offense, they were 27th. They were 26th in passing offense, 27th in scoring offense, and 24th in red zone offense. That lends itself to let's look at some offensive weapons because as much as they need to, build that O-line, and they have a decent stash right now at O-line. They picked up Luke Fortner. They've got Taylor Moton at right tackle. Ekwonu, who knows what's going to happen there, but that's a pivotal position that they're going to have to address in the draft at some stage. Whether it's one with, I don't know if Fano is going to be there, but definitely Caden Proctor. That's all these tackles in the draft are 6'8", 6'7". They're all about 330, 340. So these are absolutely, man mountains. So there's not a huge amount to pick between the top 3 tackles in the draft, but they've got to improve on the offense. I mean, they backdoored into the division title. It was just a matter of a factor that the Bucs and the Falcons just took losses or took wins off each other and just couldn't finish it in the end. So I'm concerned with their running back situation. It's almost like running back by committee with Chuba Hubbard, AJ Dillon, Jonathan Brooks, and Travis's brother, Mr. Trevor. Not really blown away by the talent there. There's no real RB1 in that pile. Brooks has got a lot of upside. But I think at this stage, tackle is definitely a need they have to address. And probably like every other team in the draft, edge or pass rusher is probably going to be a spot they're going to have to address. Help for J.C. Horn. I mean, he can't do it all there himself. I mean, maybe another corner just to shore up that back four. So tight end, yeah, there's a couple of decent tight ends in there. Sadiq, he's probably going to be a target for some other teams. But overall, offense is going to have to be. I mean, if we're going by that quote from Canales, we don't draft for death, then he's looking to win now and take advantage of what happened last year and maybe grab another win or two just to make it not so tight in the end. Again, I do have questions about Bryce Young and his ability to lead a team, his durability. I think he kind of got away with it a little bit last year. Didn't set any offensive kind of mile markers out there. Kind of did just enough to get through. Probably played above his station against the Rams in the playoffs, which that probably gives the fans something to think about and say, you know what, maybe we can trust him in the big situations. But I'm still on the fence about Young and his ability to lead, because this is with all those losing seasons they've had in Carolina and what Canales is saying, they've got to win this year and they got to win now.
The Tampa Bay Bucs, Craig, picked by no less an eminent figure than Bruce Arians when we had him on recently, and check that interview out wherever you get your podcasts, was full sure that the Bucs are going to bounce back and win this division. We were saying when we were talking about the Panthers that the Bucs effectively sideshow bobbed themselves out of this one. They were in the driving seat. They looked like they had the inside track on the division, only to drop a couple of terrible losses, including one against the Panthers, which sealed their fate. Mike Evans gone, and Levante David retiring in the offseason. Those are two big holes for them to fill. How do you think they approach this draft?
I think linebacker is definitely one that you need to look at with Levante David gone. They have Alex Anzalone, who's come in. Obviously, he's come from the Lions, I believe, and the Saints before that. So, he's a good pickup, but he's a veteran now. He's not the spring chicken that he was once. And they do have last year's draft pick, Savokia Dennis, who was okay, and he was, he did start for them last year. But it's easily upgradable. The problem is that at 15, it's a reach to go for one. I think most of the sort of main linebackers are going to be off the board by then, and you're probably really looking towards a second round for CJ Allen from Georgia, if he was to drop, or likely Jacob Rodriguez. But there is a bigger issue for me.
15 is one of those funny positions to pick, though, because it depends on what's happening. Obviously, it always depends on what's happening ahead of you, but you're in that zone where you can hope that one of those big players falls to you. And depending on which mock draft you look at, I've seen David Bailey fall out of the first round. I've seen other players fall down that board. Like, I see the Bucs as just about in that zone where they could get really lucky and get best player available and get somebody who's in excess of what they might have otherwise hoped to get.
David Bailey is exactly the position that I do believe that they need to go, which is edge. Yaya Diaby's quality pass rusher for them. Hassan Reddick is slowing down though, and they really need to get someone in to replace him, even on a rotational basis for one season until he probably moves on. They picked just before the halfway point. Again, they're probably not looking at some of the higher names. If someone like David Bailey was to fall, I think they would absolutely snap him up. But I think there's the older Akeem Mesidor, who's from Miami, but he has injury concerns, and every team is going to have to do their due diligence on whether they are, sorted. It also, if they want to go run defending, then Keldrick Falk is there, and I think that he's a great run defender who could shore up that. The edges for them against some of the other teams in the division, like the Falcons, who have Bijan Robinson, who obviously will cause them nightmares for twice this season. So I think edge is probably the way that they're going to have to go. But yeah, linebacker, if a linebacker falls, snap him up. If not, do you reach? That's the question.
Ciaran Boyle, I'm looking at the NFL mock draft database, and Akeem Mesidor, actually, who Craig just mentioned, is the player predicted to go to the Bucs in that consensus draft. Shane nodding away there as well. He's from the U, so he's a home state boy. That would be a great pick for the Bucs if that happens for them.
It would be, yeah. And like Craig said, edge is a big need for this team. I mean, they were dead last in red zone defense last year. Just could not. What was the big thing? What was the major knock on the Bucs last year? They just could not stop the run. They just could not do it, and they coughed up so many points in the third and fourth quarter that edge or a big physical imposing D tackle is gonna have to be kind of high on their list of priorities. Mesidor, love him and Bain. That tandem last year, they were just coming around the edge, just crushing people. A huge part of why the U was successful last year. I really like that Mesidor pick. But you're also looking at other spots on that defense too. What parts of that D suffered, and it was corner for me. I mean, they really had a tough time at corner,
and they've lost Jamel Dean, haven't they? If memory serves me, he's gone.
Yep, he's gone. So I mean, you're looking at to add to that position. Look at people like Avion Terrell from Clemson, big physical dude. I mean, a lot of the thing with these corners, they're not physically tall as generally corners aren't. They're all 5'11", 6 foot, but they are real bruisers. If you saw the 49ers documentary, you remember Ronnie Lott and just the pure impact he had. These guys are coming out absolutely yoked, and between him and Colton Hood out of Tennessee, just huge. That just putting the body in positions that few people would, and they're just hard hitters, real imposing figures. And you don't think of corners as that kind of, especially nowadays, but these guys are really hard hitters out of Clemson. And Clemson playing in a division that's not as strong as the SEC, but those guys, especially Terrell, he had a really good season with Clemson. You're looking at linebacker too. They got to fill in that Levante David gap. Tight end, that's another one. Kalijah Cansey's going to need help out there. It's definitely kind of a run or a defense heavy look that they're going to need. I mean, they went 2-7 down the stretch last year, and that's just killing the front office. I mean, the division was in their back pocket for the longest, and that slide was just unforgivable. They can't let that happen again. But you talk about on the defensive side, we still have all those nice pieces they have on the offensive side. I mean, the running back game is nice and strong. The wide receiver room, despite losing Mike Evans, is nice and healthy with McMillan and Egbuka back there, and another year of Sean Tucker. That's going to be a nice kind of help to them. But if we're looking at draft stuff, do we need to replace Mike Evans, or do we believe in the room we have right now? But definitely that front four, either edge or a big D tackle to help out Cansey, Vita Vea. That's going to have to be the move for the Bucs to, they're going to hate what happened at the end of last year. It's really going to leave a horrible taste in their mouth in the offseason. They're going to want to come back and just be that kind of imposing physical team again.
Shane, Bruce Arians' reason for picking the Bucs is that he just thinks they have the best offense in the division. He rates Baker Mayfield as the best quarterback in the division, and has a lot of confidence in him. And indeed, Bruce Arians' pick is backed up by the bookies, who have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as favourites to win the division. Is it a given, though, that they go defense, or Ciaran's mentioned a couple of potential offensive directions that they may look in, and at 15, as we were saying, the draft can give it them. The draft may take it away, and they may go for the best offensive player available if they can't get that elite edge or the guy that they want to shore up the defense or start shoring up what was their weakness last year.
I don't know. I think defense is where they should go, but I mean, how many times have we sat back in the draft and we thought that the common sense thing was one thing and it went a completely different direction? What's interesting is
what was your great quote, Shane, that you said in a self-deprecatory way, but I think could apply to all of us to the surprise of no one. I know nothing.
Yeah, that was the Falcons. Maybe the NFC South is always there to try and undo the way that we look at these things, and it's interesting. I'm just trying to like take a look through the roster here, and there's nothing necessarily on the offensive side which is screaming out that it has to be fixed immediately. I mean, I know they've lost Mike Evans, but they have plenty of wide receiver talent in there to build on. The offensive line probably needs work, but is it a talent issue there that's really holding them back, or is it more so that schematically? I think defense is what let them down in that 2-7 run that Ciaran alluded to earlier. So I don't know. It really depends unless they just have a genuine graw for somebody that they're speaking face to face. So, and even then, it's somebody is either sliding down to 15 or they're making a decision to say, hey, there's somebody out there that we're making them a move for here. We'll try and move up 2 or 3 places in the draft. And I just don't see that happening because the whole front 7 is completely in flux here. Well, who can you fully rely on in this Tampa Bay defense apart from Vita Vea? And even then, he's the wrong side of 30. And that's in terms of how a team is sort of building properly into the future. As much as as a nose tackle, he's been playing some exceptional football. Who's around him? How are they getting pressure in? You talk about the fact that some teams aren't necessarily drafting for depth. I know Ciaran was talking about it. There's the Panthers. I think the Bucs probably need to start drafting for depth on defense because injuries can take a toll quickly. You can't let a season spiral like the way that happened to them again last year. So yeah, it's we were talking earlier about maybe going for Akeem Mesidor, and as well as that, few other players. I mean, I see some people suggesting that Kedrick Falk might be somebody that they should be considered in round 1. I'm not quite sure whether that's a great way to spend their capital. Linebacker, I definitely think they could wait until the second round. Again, I've seen people mention the likes of Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech. I've seen that the linebacker class this year is quite deep. You could probably wait till the second or third round to try and fix that. But for me, it's, what makes sense and what they should be doing first and foremost is trying to get as many of those edge players and linebackers sort of fit in there as possible, because in the free agency, yes, they brought in Ashawn Robinson and Muhammad as well to try and front up that front, say, and Alex Anelzoni as well to try and front up that sort of pass rush. But it's just not. It doesn't feel like enough. It doesn't feel like they've invested in it enough and tried to create depth and create identity into defensive football, which we thought they had enough of so they can push ahead. We were sitting here last year and we weren't talking about the Buccaneers as being in challengers for the division. We're talking about them being challengers for the NFC, and that completely fell apart, and his defense where they fell apart. And sometimes reaction from last year is the greater driving force rather than the bigger vision, but I think it has to be this time, especially when it comes to those front players.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
This is one of those topics that no one really wants to think about, but if you're a parent, a homeowner, married, or helping take care of aging parents, it's something that honestly deserves a little attention. I'm talking about estate planning. And before you tune out thinking it's complicated or expensive, that's actually why I want to mention Trust and Will. Trust and Will makes estate planning feel way less intimidating than it sounds. They offer modern, attorney-designed wills and trusts that you can create online. And the process is surprisingly straightforward. In fact, you can create a will in as little as 30 minutes. That includes things like guardianship for your kids or pets, how your assets are distributed, and even healthcare directives. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect your loved ones with Trust and Will, the most trusted name in online estate planning. Go to trustandwill.com/future to get 20% off. That's trustandwill.com/future for 20% off. trustandwill.com/FUTURE.
Ciaran Boyle, in last year's draft, the Atlanta Falcons traded back into the first round to take edge rusher James Pierce, who was actually the best performing rookie pass rusher in last year's draft. He racked up more sacks than anyone else, but he may not be playing for the Falcons in the 2026-27 season because of his off-field issues, which the Falcons really should have done a little bit more research before expending all that draft capital. Long story short, they don't have a first-round pick in the 2026 draft because of that. On paper, arguably the most talented team in the division, but also year in, year out, the serial underperformers in the NFC South, a division of serial underperformers.
The Jots. Yes. The Pierce thing was really bizarre. I mean, like you said, he had a great first season, 10.5 sacks, but I mean, there's all sorts of different, stories about whether he'll be available, whether he'll be on the roster, etc. So there's no point really speculating on that right now. All to say that they're probably going to need a linebacker in the draft. But again, it's a new dawn in Atlanta. Matt Ryan is in there. Terry Fontenot is gone, as I'm sure a lot of Falcon fans will be happy. The whole Penix Cousins experiment was great while it lasted.
And they've got Ian Cunningham as their general manager, although apparently he's not their general manager, so the Bears didn't get a compensatory pick. But let's not go there.
Well, let's see how Matt Ryan does back in Atlanta. Let's see what he's got cooking.
When Matt Ryan blames Ian Cunningham for the draft, I want that compensatory pick for the Bears. I'm waiting on that.
I mean,
the receipts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the situation Ryan probably wanted to walk into. He was hoping for like a top 12 pick, but I mean, 48 is what they got. They've got that's the whole thing now. Who's going to be there? The premier, defensive players are going to be gone. The best O-line players are gone. I mean, you're looking at probably, I don't want to call them seconds here, but somebody like Monroe Freeling or because Caleb McGarry at right tackle is not exactly a superstar stud. So they're going to need help at tackle as well. Woods from Clemson, he's probably going to be gone at 48. Caden McDonald, the big tackle from Ohio State, I don't think he'll be there. So that's the main problem for Ryan right now. Where do I find value in this pick? Or maybe I go back and give up that 48th pick and get a few more picks and try and do some work. Wide receiver is something they're going to need to address, in my opinion. I think they're a little light in that position. For them, that part of the draft, they're probably going to see players like Denzel Boston, huge guy out of Washington, 6'5". I mean, they're just loaded with slot receivers in there. So somebody like him would be a nice addition. But when they heard that news, like we all did in San Francisco, about Pierce and his extracurricular activities with Dade County's finest, you gotta think that linebacker is going to be kind of jumping to the top of their wish list. Fortunately for them, I mean, like we said, it is a deepish draft in the top tier. There is a lot of good kind of second tier. We talked already about C.J. Allen out of Georgia, Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech. I like the kid. I think I mentioned him last week. Jeremiah Trotter's kid out of Missouri. So there's every chance that one of those three will be there. Really, really good, serviceable linebackers they were probably focusing on at that 48th pick. Another person to look out for. It's not not technically related to the draft, but it might impact on their decisions to draft, is Jahan Dotson from that they got from the Eagles. I think he's in year 5 now. Not exactly lit the world on fire. Was a first round pick in 22, but he'll be looking to turn the world up and really put a marker on. He was used to being the number 1 guy, and he was number 2. Then he got lost in the mix of Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. So he'll be looking to make a fresh start. So he might be that option for the Falcons to say, you know what, I think we're good right now with this guy. Let's focus on the linebacker situation. And like everybody else, secondary is going to be a big thing to address. I think the addition of Stefanski in there will give him a nice picture as to what he's going to look at. He saw the impact that the secondary and the defense in general had in Cleveland, and he's not going to bring Schwartz with him, but he's going to look at what Schwartz was able to do and how that impacted the team in a positive manner. So I would look at some corners and safeties in that part of the draft too. But yeah, I've got to think that the linebacker position has got to be something they're going to be zeroing in on, because I don't think anyone's going to know from day to day what's going on with Pierce.
Shane, with the benefit now of hindsight on that James Pierce draft pick, we can see that it probably wasn't the best use of the capital that the Falcons deployed, although let's, as Ciaran said, wait and see how that one pans out. Having said that, we were crediting the Falcons last year with doing what they needed to do in the draft and addressing the positions of need, particularly addressing that pass rush, which they did successfully turn around last year. It's going to need a little bit more work this year, depending on Pierce's availability. But I wouldn't be too down on the Falcons, or am I wrong here? Like, they do have a strong roster. I think Stefanski upgrades them in the coaching stakes. Granted, they've replaced Penix with Tua while he recovers from his injury, who's effectively the left-handed Kirk Cousins, slow and steady, don't throw the ball too far, try not to make too many mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, we said this last year as well, that the Falcons have the most talented roster in the division. And I think you're right. This is Stefanski being in there as coach, but if it changes their prospects going forward, be interesting as well. I mean, we talk so much about the fact they don't have a first rounder, but hitting in that sort of 6 to 7 rounders, whoever they bring in there, is going to be key. And I think Stefanski might be a better coach to do that than we've seen previously in Atlanta. I just think
because the knock on the Falcons, to your point, has been the drop off between the star players that they undoubtedly have and the next tier. Like, if you talked about the Panthers and Dave Canales saying we don't draft for depth, the Falcons historically definitely do not draft for depth because they don't have any.
But that's a big thing. I mean, on offense in particular, it's like you've Drake London as wide receiver, and then where does it go then? That's why I think receiver should be target number one coming in here. Bijan Robinson as running back. When what's your second option? It just completely drops off. I mean, especially in a situation where you sort of have two quarterbacks again. It's this whole Penix Cousins experiment has replaced itself with the Penix Tua experiment, and I don't know if that's going to give you better results. Maybe they might even bring in another quarterback later on in the draft. I believe Georgia Tech's Haynes King, hero of the Aer Lingus College Classic, was in the building as well. I can't imagine they will use draft capital on him later on.
Hero of the Aer Lingus College Classic, where he ran the ball rather than throwing it. I'm not necessarily sure that's the solution.
They won anyway. That's all that matters. So maybe that is the solution here for this Falcons team. Look, I think no matter what they do, again, coaching is going to be key here. But I definitely think this skill positions, because they've invested in defense, and I think they'll be able to coach in defense. We talk about what are the top needs. You outlined the linebacker situation. Again, as we were saying here, there's a deep enough linebacker class. They may be able to still fix that in free agency as well. I definitely think that wide receiver is someone that they need to sort of hit as quickly as possible. People are even saying if you go further down the line and you end up looking for the likes of Zachariah Branch from Georgia and see if he fits into to the system there. There's a few different options that they could go to, but I think at this point now with Atlanta, like what's the knock been? The knock hasn't been talent. The knock hasn't been injury. Coaching has been a key part of it, but I think maximizing everything that you're doing in key moments. I saw them play in Germany when they had control of the game in certain phases, but they just couldn't execute. And they have no real playmakers outside of London and Robinson. They need more playmakers. They just need somebody who they feel has that magic to create something out of nothing. And I think the draft really needs where to go and dip in for that. I think skill position players on offense needs to be where they go in their first couple of hits, and it depends on how they might trade up for that as well. Wide receiver for me is a key area for the Falcons to hit here. The linebacker situation can be fixed elsewhere in the draft or elsewhere free agency. They need that magic. They need someone with magic hands. They need someone to have London on that offense in particular, and I think wide receiver is where they should go.
Craig, with the Falcons, they kind of draft like a lot of fans approach to draft. They don't really care about picks after the first round. It often feels with the Falcons, because they're one of those teams that you're thinking, when was the last time you hit a home run with a guy who came, other than the ones that were expected to hit home runs with? And that's probably a function of coaching as well. I've said it often enough. It's not a coincidence that teams like the Ravens, the Steelers, the Packers consistently, quote unquote, draft well in the later rounds. They're developing the players that they bring in. And Falcons haven't done that well.
No, Kevin Stefanski is now there as head coach, and that's something he's going to have to take up with Cunningham and Matt Ryan. I do think that wide receiver is somewhere where they can hit in that second round quite easily. I think that it's quite a deep draft class at receiver. I was looking at Chris Brazzell for them, but he has off-field issues, and I don't really think that they want to run down that road again. And they don't apparently.
A very unfortunate choice of words there, given what happened with James Pearce. But anyway, carry on. Allegedly.
But there is
very much running down that road when the cops came.
There is Jeremy Bernard from Alabama that would be a starting wide receiver too, I think, that could be there. A lot of us are also overlooking the fact that Kyle Pitts is still there on the franchise tag. So there is another person, but they could do with leaning on their wide receivers a little bit more, seeing as I think that their second wide receiver had around about 300 yards for the season. So not ideal. Another position, though, is cornerback. Their cornerback room is awful, like seriously underwhelming. D. Alford, who was a big part of that, he's gone off to Buffalo, but there really hasn't been a lot of change in that backfield. I think that there's a key person there that if he's available, then they should go for, and that's Keith Obney from Arizona State. I think he really showed up in the playoffs for that run that they had. Obviously, was overshadowed a little bit by a certain New York Giants running back who headbutts walls. But he kind of really came to the forefront during that playoff run and had a really good season last year and has kind of carried it on. It just depends on whether they want to take risks. And unfortunately, because of the picks that they have, they probably will need to. I do think defensive line is an issue. You look at all the mock drafts, every mock draft has them taking Christian Miller from Georgia or Caleb Banks from Florida if he falls that far. So a lot of people think that the interior of that line is where they need to go, but wide receiver and cornerback just looks super thin at the moment for the Falcons.
Lead us off, Shane, on the New Orleans Saints, because you're big on the Saints, unless things have changed since you made your bold prediction that they would win the division. Are you still as confident, and what do they need to do in the draft to make that prediction a reality?
Oh, I'm still confident in these New Orleans Saints because I look around elsewhere in the division and they don't fill me with confidence as much. So why not really back what the Saints are doing and how they really built in to the season at the end last year in terms of momentum they have. But I mean, if there's one thing they need to fix it quickly, is they need to look at their quarterback and give them somebody to throw the ball to. Let's look at the roster that they have now. Like they brought in Jalen Polk from the Patriots, who didn't light it up in New England. You look elsewhere. Yes, they got Chris Olave, but they've lost Raheed Shaheed. Yes, they brought in Noah Fant, and it's great to have Travis Etienne. Is Etienne? Am I saying that right?
Etienne.
Trying to say it au français, but probably makes it even more wrong again.
Almost as good as your Cork accent.
Oh, my Cork accent is terrible, but I don't think I'm ever allowed down there after taking off Ciaran O'Donovan that time. He hasn't, I won't do it again. I was going to do it again. I won't do it again. It's not as fun. Me and him still have to have a row about the Chiefs anyway, so I can bring it out then. Back on the Saints, they made a move in the run game. I think they've made small additions, but never a big improvement in the pass game. I don't think their offensive line is as in dire need as elsewhere. Yes, cornerback and edge would be nice improvements they can make further in the draft. But I think first and foremost, especially because they have the luxury of being able to pick 8th overall, receiver, get the star, as much star power in as you can get it. Try give that offense a real bit of juice. So yeah, I still think, look, generally speaking, I'm still confident in what the Saints have going in the future. I know there's some, a lot of mock drafts have them going for the likes of Caleb Downs and just trying to, again, pick whoever the best players off the board and picking an 8. But I still think, fundamentally, fundamental receiver has to be an area to have to improve. Receiver or tight ends. Somebody that has to help that pass game, because Shook, I think, has proven himself to be able to manage games better, to be able to manage situations better. You have to kind of trust him now and give him a guy to work with outside Chris Olave, and I think that's where they should be going.
Well, you can give him a guy to work with, Craig, or you can bolster that defense, which will also although not directly, but will help Tyler Shough. And a lot of mock drafts have either Caleb Downs, as Shane mentioned, or Ruben Bain going to the Saints with the number 8 pick. It'd be kind of fun to see both Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain in the same division, the two teammates from the U, two elite pass rushers in college.
Yeah, and edges where I have their biggest need as well. You know, they've got to replace Cam Jordan, who has consistently delivered for 15 years. Like, we, you know, take nothing away from the guy. 15 years is a long old time to be at one place, and there's been no drop off. And that's the reason that he's not back with the Saints, is because he still believes he can deliver, and he's not having that hometown discount.
And
anymore.
Putting out one of the better player podcasts, on the bar there really is not high. I'm damning him with faint praise there. It is actually a good podcast.
It is indeed. So they have the 8th overall pick, and it could be a time to get a game wrecker there. If Ruben Bain or Arvell Reese or David Bailey fall, you snap him up. You really do, because they do have Chase Young, and Chase Young has weirdly slowly gotten better over the last few seasons and actually put some consistent pressure on the table. But did he do that because he had a player like Cam Jordan on the other side also doing the same? And does he play much better when he has that elite pass rusher on the opposite side to him? Obviously, they are all potentially going to have their pick of the wide receivers as well. Carnell Tate seems to be mocked to them an inordinate amount of times, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that would be a great thing for the Saints. They could always go with Jordan Tyson as well at that point, or they could fall in love with Makai Lemon like a lot of other teams have, and he could be moving up board. So it is still early on, you know, with a few weeks to go. There's going to be a lot of moving and shaking with a lot of these sort of positions where there are clustered players together. But, you know, Shane's right. Olave, they had Juwan Johnson who caught, you know, a decent amount of yards, and then there's just a huge drop off to Rashid Shaheed, who left halfway through the season. So just shows how bad that was. But there are other areas. I think guard they need to look at some point. Their offensive line is not great. That would be another way to stop Shough getting all shook up. But you know, we'll go from there.
Mickey Loomis seems to be allergic, Ciaran Boyle, to picking offensive linemen. Like, pretty much every one he's picked there has absolutely stunk out the joint. Like, they don't seem to have had any joy. You know, Mickey Loomis has kicked the can down the road and not done an awful lot in the draft to begin with. But that's one area where they're persistently and consistently indicted for their lack of activity and their lack of success.
Yeah, we could do a whole separate show on how Mickey Loomis is still in a job down there. I mean, it's amazing how I think he's been there 24 years. It's amazing how he's been able to parlay one Super Bowl into 24 years of job security. But anyway, that's another thing. It's a bit of a conundrum, this Saints team. I mean, on the one hand, they finished fairly strong. They finished 4-1. Tyler Shough emerges as a decent candidate at the quarterback. I'm still very much on the fence about him. I think he kind of lucked into to a couple of wins at the end, and might have been helped with some victories by a certain kicker from County Down. But
you're playing my tune now, because, like, for all of the talking up of the Saints, no disrespect, Shane. Yeah, they're 6-11, and in the NFC South, that put them just 2 games out of winning the division. But it is still the NFC South, and they did kind of jam their way into a couple of victories, and we didn't expect much of them, and they delivered slightly more than was expected. But I wouldn't be kind of going 2 feet into the Saints are well ahead of schedule and they'll contend this year. We'll see.
Yeah, they backdoored into wins against the Bucs towards the end when the Bucs were god awful, and they beat the Panthers on one of those. They happened to get them on the Panthers win-loss line. They picked them up on a loss on an L week. I mean, Shough. The thing with him is the sample size is too small. I mean, he had 9 games. Yeah, he completed 67.5% of his passes, 10 touchdowns, but 6 interceptions. So it's too much, or it's too small of a sample size for me to get too excited. A lot of people are anointing him as this phenomenal talent. Drew Brees is heaping praise on him. It's way too early on that. This team is in what I say the conundrum is the offense is god awful, or at least it was before the draft. The defense, strangely enough, was really, really good. I mean, top 10 in total defense. They were 4th in passing D, and they were 10 in red zone D. And, you know, we talked about Cam Jordan. I mean, we're not talking enough about Brian Bresee. Craig was right about Chase Young. He had a really good season last year. Justin Reed, they picked up from the Chiefs. So quietly, they did work in that defensive side. I mean, they did put a lot of teams to the sword, especially with a lot of picks they had. But the offense is brutal. I mean, that wide receiver room, if you look at it right now, other than Chris Olave, Mason Tipton, Devon Vele, I mean, that's not exactly going to sell tickets at the Superdome. So the wide receiver, to me, I mean, it's all about offense, really. They were dead last in red zone offense. Now, when a stat is thrown like that, there's only one you're going to look, and it's most likely wide receiver. I think the O-line, for as much as we kind of trashed it, they do have Fuaga with a decent season at tackle. Kelvin Banks too, the recent draft pick. He's getting better. They picked up Edwards from the Bills. So there's talent there to build around. I'm sure they're going to address it in the draft too. But for me, it's got to be wide receiver or possibly a pass catching tight end, like we talked about with the 8th pick. Maybe Kenyon Sadiq will be somebody to look at, because again, this is a copycat league. Teams look at what worked out for teams last year. What worked out last year? Colson Loveland caught fire. Tyler Warren caught fire. Oh, let's see what the tight end
Harold
room
Fannin Jr. caught
Harold
fire.
Fannin Jr.
3 great tight ends in the first round.
Exactly. So I mean, teams are always looking to see what worked for other teams, and I think that Sadiq will definitely be somebody that they'll be looking at. Not a great blocker, but these days, a lot of teams are just looking for a pass catching tight end. It's that the blocking seems to be secondary these days. But again, like Craig said, probably somebody like Carnell Tate. But again, I would not be surprised if they went Bailey with that 8th pick. But if I'm there, I got to look at the wide receiver room and the paucity of talent there and say, we've got to address this. We've got to give, if not our line, we've got to give this quarterback at least some sort of weapon to throw to. We saw what happened with Cam Ward in Tennessee when he had nobody really to throw to. It's critical for a quarterback in that first year or two that they've got to have somebody they can rely on, somebody that can just even just to check down to. I'd be looking at wide receiver or at least tight end for the Saints.
Right, the Saints, who once felt the need for Shaheed, we'll see whether they freak for Sadiq in just over 3 weeks' time.